good evening, good night, whatever time it is in the cosmos when this is finding you there. Welcome or welcome back. Welcome to Kaichi Alchemy. You can call me Kachi. This is a space of love, y'all. So, it has been quite a minute since we stepped off of this continuum concept train, and I am having that type of energy, type of time in my cycle where I feel like not incredibly inspired to be yapping and channeling from this ego interference kind of space that you have to work through sometimes. And it can be more useful sometimes when I just take the message straight from the source, whatever that source may be. So I am not even probably going to pull any cards today, but we are going to be getting into the next section of the first chapter of the continuum concept. I think this is the 5th section that we've done so far. And if you are coming in this blind, no context, go ahead and look into the playlist in the playlist section of the channel, and you can find the continuum concept playlist and watch those first 4 sections if you would like to do that. Or maybe there's just a message in here for you today specific to this section that we're going to read today. So we were talking about Caesar and Pepe. Oh yes, a little word to the side before we get started. This book was written a long time ago. It's a little dense. It's quite dense. It's quite academic. Vocabulary, wordy, but also old. And, when we used to have these highly educated white folks putting their feet in their mouths. You'll know what I'm talking about soon. But I prefer to avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? So, let's see here. This is going to be a moderately long section. So feel free to grab some tea, some coffee, knitting project, a blanket, and a stuffy or something, whatever you feel like. And we'll get into that. Did I say thank you guys for being here and all of the likes and shares and subscribes and engagement and stuff? Yeah. And again, if anybody would like for me to pull some cards for you in your particular situation right now, feel free to drop it in the chat. I might get around to it at the end, okay? For me, these odd clues that we in civilization were laboring under some rather serious misapprehensions about man's nature did not at the time suggest any general principles on the subject. But even if I did not form an idea of what I wanted to know, or even a clear notion that I was engaged in a search, at least I recognized that I had found a path worth following. It was enough to keep me on course for the next few years. The second expedition, to a region 6 weeks from the utmost marches of Spanish-speaking Venezuela, was led by another Italian, a professor who felt strongly that girls had no business in jungles. One of my former partners managed to get me a grudging acceptance nonetheless, and I was able to follow my path to the Stone Age world of the Yaqana and the Sanema tribes, preserved from outside by what was called impenetrable rainforest in the upper Cara river basin near the Brazilian border. The strongly individual personalities of the men, women, and children were even more evident here because there had never been any need to cultivate a defensive blank face for strangers like the Tarapans. But in that utterly foreign land, I failed to notice that much of the unreal quality of its people was accounted for by an absence of unhappiness, a large factor in every society familiar to me. I must have had a vague notion that somewhere behind the trees, just out of sight, the ghost of Cecil B. DeMille was directing the proceedings in classic one-dimensional Hollywood savage style. The rules of human behavior did not apply to them. For 3 weeks, during which my partners said that they had been unavoidably detained by a large band of pygmies who kept them as pets, I lived alone with the Yaquana. In that short time, I unlearned more of the assumptions upon which I was reared than I had on the entire first expedition. And I began to see the value of the unlearning process. Several more contributions to an alternative point of view on the subject of work, too, penetrated past the intervening layers of my prejudice. One was the apparent absence of a word for work in the Yaquana vocabulary. They had the word tarabajo to use about dealings with non-Indians who, apart from us, were known to them almost entirely by hearsay. This was a slight mispronunciation of the Spanish trabajo and referred quite accurately to what the conquistadors and their successors meant by it. It struck me that it was the only Spanish derivative among all the words I learned from them. There appeared to be no Yaquana concept of work similar to ours. There were words for each activity that might have been included, but no generic term. If they did not distinguish work from other ways of spending time, it was little wonder that they behaved so irrationally, as I then judged, about fetching water. The women left their firesides several times a day, carrying 2 or 3 small gourds at a time, walked part of the way down the mountain, picked their way down a precipitous slope that was extremely slippery when wet, filled with gourds and a streamlet, and climbed back to the village above. The whole operation took about 20 minutes. Many of them carried babies as well as gourds. When I went down for the first time, I was struck by the inconvenience of walking so far for a commodity so constantly needed. It was inconceivable that they should not choose a village site where water was more accessible. The last part of the walk, at the stream bank, made me tense with anxiety at the necessity for taking care at every step to avoid falling. To be sure, the Yaquana have a superior sense of balance, and like the North American Indian, no vertigo, but the fact was that neither they nor I ever fell, and I alone resented having to pay attention to my steps. Their steps were equally cautious, but they did not frown as I did at the hardship of taking care. They went on gossiping and joking softly on the flat or on the slope, for they usually went in groups of 2, 3, or more, and, as always, a party mood prevailed. Once a day, each woman put her gourds and clothing, a small apron-like cache sexe, and ankle, knee, wrist, upper arm, neck, and ear beads on the bank, and bathed herself and her baby. However many women and children participated, the bath had a Roman quality of luxuriousness. Every move bespoke sensual enjoyment, and the babies were handled like objects so marvelous that their owners felt constrained to put a mock modest face on their pleasure and pride. Walking down the mountain was done in the same accustomed to the best, almost smug style, and their last perilous steps into the stream would have done credit to a Miss World coming forward to claim her crown. This was true of all the Ikwana women and girls I saw, though their distinct personalities rendered the manifestations of their coziness quite various. Hello. Upon reflection, I was hard put to think of a better way to use the water fetching time, at least from the point of view of well-being. If progress, on the other hand, were the criterion, or its handmaidens, speed, efficiency, and novelty, the water walks were positively moronic. But my experience of the ingenuity of the people in question was such that I had no doubt that had I asked them to invent a means of precluding my going to the stream for water, they would have put together some bamboo pipes or a pulley to help me deal with the slippery bit, or built me a hut near the stream. They themselves had no motive to progress, as they felt no need, no pressure from any quarter to change their ways. That I deemed an imposition to have to make use of my perfectly adequate coordination, or resented from unexamined principle the use of time to fill a need, was an arbitrary assignment of values that their culture did not share. Another insight about work came more as an experience than an observation. Anshu, chief of the Ikwana village, made a practice of guiding me, whenever he had the chance, toward happier behavior. I had just traded a glass ornament for 7 canes of sugar, and I was in the process also of assimilating a lesson, which I shall mention later, about trading technique among people whose good relations are more important than their bargains. Anshu's wife started back to their hut in an isolated place nearby, and Anshu, a Sanema who seemed to be his butler, and I were returned over 2 mountains to the village atop a third. The 7 stalks were on the ground where the wife had left them. Anshu directed the Sanema brave to take 3, and himself took another 3 on his shoulder, leaving 1 on the ground. I expected the men to carry it all, and when Anshu pointed to the last cane and said, "Amade, you," I was for an instant annoyed at the idea that I was ordered to carry something on the steep path back when there were 2 strong men to do it. But just in time I was reminded that Anshu sooner or later turned out to know best about almost anything. I shouldered the cane, and as Anshu waited for me to lead the way, I started the first ascent. The burden of dread of the long walk back accumulated on the way down and hardened through lunch at Anshu's, and the time at the cane garden was now compounded by the news that I was to have a heavy cane to carry as well. The first few steps were weighed with the thought of the strain I always experienced on treks through jungles, especially uphill, and carrying anything that did not leave my hands free. But quite suddenly, all that added weight fell away. Anshu gave not the slightest sign that I ought to walk faster, that my prestige would suffer if I kept a comfortable pace, that I was being judged for my performance, or that time on the path was in any way less desirable than time after arrival. Hurry had always been a factor in similar exercises with my white partners, as had anxiety about keeping up with the men, preserving the honor of the fair sex, and the uncontested assumption that the occasion was unpleasant because it tested one's physical endurance and moral determination. This time, the very different demeanor of Anshu and the Sanema removed these elements and left me simply walking in the jungle with a sugar cane on my shoulder. Gone was any sense of competition, and the physical strain turned from an imposition upon my body to a satisfying proof of its strength. while my teeth-gritting willpower in the face of martyrdom no longer applied. Then a new pleasure added itself to my freedom. I was aware of carrying not just a stick of cane, but part of a load shared among 3 companions. I had heard about team spirit until it ceased to connote anything but pretense at school and summer camp. One's own position had always been at risk. One always felt threatened, watched, judged. The straightforward business of doing a task in partnership with a fellow being was lost in a tangle of competitiveness. The primordial feeling of pleasure at pooling one's forces with those of others had never had a chance to arise. On the way, I was astonished at the speed and ease with which I was walking. Usually drenched with perspiration and pushing my limits, I would have been moving no more quickly. Perhaps I was catching a glimpse of the Indian secret of outdoing our well-nourished strong men despite their generally inferior muscle power. They were economizing their forces by using them only to do the job, wasting none on associated tensions. I was reminded of my surprise at the Tarapans on the first expedition when, loaded down with about 75 pounds each on their backs and carefully crossing a bridge consisting of a single narrow log felled across a stream, one of them would think of a joke and stop in mid-log, turn around, tell the story to the men piling up behind him, and then proceed across while he and his friends all laughed in their peculiarly musical way. It never occurred to me that they were not suffering as we did under the circumstances, so their merriment gave a strange, almost lunatic impression. It was in fact very like their habit of telling a joke in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep. Though some were snoring loudly, all would awaken instantly, laugh, and in seconds resume sleep, snoring and all. They did not feel that being awake was more unpleasant than being asleep, and they awoke fully alert, as when a distant pack of wild boar were heard by all the Indians simultaneously, though they had been asleep, while I, awake and listening to the sounds of the surrounding jungle, had noticed nothing. Like most travelers, I had watched their unfamiliar behavior without comprehending it and never attempted to bridge the gap between their expression of human nature and ours. But on that second expedition, I acquired a taste for the new ideas that came of opening closed subjects, such as progress is good, man must make laws to live by, a child belongs to its parents, leisure is pleasanter than work. Expeditions 3 and 4 under my own leadership, one 4 and the other 9 months long, took me back to the same region, and the process continued. My journals reflect that the unlearning technique was becoming second nature to me, but the broader, unquestioned premises upon which my own culture founded its view of the human condition, such as the one that unhappiness is as legitimate a part of experience as happiness, and necessary in order to render happiness appreciable, or that it is more advantageous to be young than to be old, those still took me a long time to pry loose for re-examination. At the end of the 4th trip, I returned to New York with my head full of all that I had seen and a point of view so stripped of presuppositions that the effect was like arriving after a long haul at zero. I held my observations like separate pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, wary of putting anything together, accustomed by now to dissecting anything which looked suspiciously like a group of behavior patterns posing as a principle of human nature. It was not until an editor asked me to write a piece elaborating a statement of mine quoted in the New York Times that I began to reverse the tearing down process, and bit by bit to perceive the order that underlay not only my South American observations, but also the naked fragments into which I had broken my experience of civilized life. Still, at the juncture I was innocent of theory. Built as I looked about with my unblinkered eyes, I saw for the first time some of the distortions in the personalities around me and began to understand some of the distorting forces as well. After about a year, I also recognized the evolutionary origins of human expectations and tendencies that began to explain the high state of well-being of my savage friends compared with the civilized. I'm going to read a little footnote because it's very funny. It says, I would be ashamed to admit to the Indians that where I come from, the women do not feel themselves capable of raising children until they read the instructions written in a book by a strange man. Continue. Before discussing these ideas in a book, I thought it best to make a fifth expedition from which I have recently returned. I wanted to look again at the Yaquana, this time with my newly formed views in mind, to see whether my observations, only rallied retrospectively into a body of evidence, might be usefully augmented by deliberate study. The airstrip we cleared on the second expedition and used on the third and fourth had become the site of a mission house and a weather station, both abandoned. The Yaquana, despite the acquisition of shirts and pants by some of their number, were reassuringly unchanged. And the neighboring Sanema, though reduced by disease to near extinction, held equally firm to their ancient and proven manner of life. Both tribes were willing to work or barter for gifts from outside, but not to trade any part of their views, traditions, or way of life for them. Several shotguns and some flashlights created in their possessors a moderate desire for powder, shot, percussion caps, and batteries, but not enough to make them do any work they did not enjoy, nor pursue a task after it had become tedious. Some details that had escaped casual observation, such as whether or not children are present during the sexual act of their parents, were filled in by questioning, as well as others, like their view of the universe, mythology, shamanic doings, etc., which had relevance to the sort of culture it is that suits their nature so well. But in the main, Expedition 5 served to assure me that my interpretation of their behavior, constructed from my recollections of it, was supported by the reality. Indeed, the once unaccountable actions of Indians of both tribes, viewed in the light of continuum principles, became not only understandable, but often predictable. In my search for exceptions that might point out flaws in my reasoning, I found that they had consistently proved the rule, as in the case of a baby who sucked his thumb, stiffened his body, and screamed like a civilized baby, but who presented no mystery, as he had been taken away shortly after birth by the missionary and kept in a Caracas hospital for 8 months until his illness was cured and he could be returned to his family. Dr. Robert Coles, the child psychologist and writer, called in by an American foundation to appraise my ideas, told me he had been invited as an expert in the field, but that the field unfortunately does not exist yet, and neither he nor anyone else could be considered an authority in it. The continuum concept must therefore be evaluated on its own merits, as it touches, or not, those half-buried senses and faculties in each person that it sets out to describe and reinstate. That concludes chapter 1, How My Ideas Were So Radically Changed. I think that the main takeaway from that section today for all of y'all is like, if you are struggling right now and you're going through a tough season, which I feel like most people are right now. I don't think I need to have any intuitive stuff to deal with that. The advice is to work on shifting your perspective. To like try and play around with it. Try and put yourself into the headspace of this person who is removed from the society, from the environment, from the context which trained her to compete, to avoid challenge, to avoid hard work, to avoid exerting oneself, and if you're going to exert yourself, it has to be pouring into the energy of competition in one way or another, right? It's this whole energy of paying for good things with bad things. Like you have to suffer in order to earn happiness, right? You have to suffer and self-sacrifice in order to earn connection, attunement, freedom, alignment, sugar, smegs, like whatever it is that you want to experience, that you see as a pleasurable, positive thing. We grow up in civilized society learning that not only is life suffering, but that we do not deserve to experience pleasure or joy in any way other than as a reward for self-punishment and self-sacrifice and competition. And maybe even like beating out the competition sometimes. But always a reward for suffering. And this is encouraged by many approaches to parenting by many people these days. Lots of them, parenting based off of advice written in books. I mean, there's definitely lots of parents with nuanced experiences that write books about their experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But outsourcing your power as a parent to an author is nuts. And we have... Anyways, that's not the point here. The point is, if you're struggling right now, maybe what the exhaustion and the overwhelm and the negativity really is this excess tension that is created in your mind because of the resistance to doing things that challenge you, do things that strain your muscles, engage your mind, use your energy. You know what I mean? If something is asking something of you, immediately we start to think, well, what's in it for us? Because we're raised in competition. And so we have to keep score. We have to strategize. We have to say, well, if I do this, then I have to know that this happens next, because then I know that it's worthwhile to invest in this, right? And this takes us out of being able to live in the moment. And there are many systems in civilized society that attempt to reorganize and restructure your experience of reality so that you are forced to at least periodically remove yourself from the present moment in order to keep your body alive, even a lot of times. You are required to engage in a system that did not bring you into the system for the love and the joy of it, because they had excess, because they had a desire to build, because they had a desire to share. Because We have children added to the system, and those children have to become cogs in that system because they take resources out of that system. So they have to put them back in. They're born into bondage. Not just practical bondage. They're born into psychological bondage. And it's absolutely something that we all have the opportunity to free ourselves from. But that's the thing. It takes the work. It takes the intention. You got to do it. Or you're going to struggle and you're going to suffer. Or you're going to be tired. You're going to maybe be tempted to like lose hope sometimes or give up on things that really mean something to you. And all of this just because of this chronic depletion and this chronic competition for resources. Instead of having this mindset that we are all in this together, we are all living in this present moment right here, right now, and we're all gonna do everything that we can to further our needs for pleasure and practicality simultaneously, interwoven together. They are the same thing. There is no purpose in feeding our children if those children are in psychological and spiritual bondage and aren't able to like enjoy and enact the experience of living in a natural and pleasurable way. We didn't get here overnight. I don't think that there's any use in saying there's some big bad conspiracy, some big bad wolf, trying to orchestrate this all to happen. But whether or not you believe that it's a big conspiracy or it just worked out this way, we didn't get here overnight. It took years and years and years. It took generations and generations. It took societies collapsing and falling and rising. There's so much history behind how we got into the economies and the governments and the structures and the institutions that we have that prevail all over the earth today. All over the earth. And those civilized parts of the world that reach out everywhere. It's all colonization. It's well, you know what? That's how we got here. Because we walked away from family values. We walked away from the mother and the children at the center, and we all served them because they're where we came from, and we love ourselves, so we love them. We love ourselves, so we serve them. We value our emotional and spiritual vitality, and so we honor it. We work hard, and we play hard, and we love hard, and we check people. We stand up for ourselves and we expect other people to stand up for themselves. We're a group, we're a community, we're a family. And what did we do instead? Somebody, hello, yes sir. Somebody had a family. And they lived in a family. And they lived in a mother-centered environment where the mothers and the children lived at the center, were worshipped in a sense. Every decision, every interaction was based upon the connection. This is a community. This is a family. We're all in this together and we're all going to enjoy it. We're not going to seek food or shelter or progress just like at the expense of the mental, spiritual, emotional well-being of our family members. We're not going to allow our survival to be threatened by the emotional instability of some of our family members. We're going to work together. We're going to hold each other in check. We're going to do this with a good attitude. We're going to live in the moment. That was our family values. That was our time of living aligned and sustainable. And so what happened? How did we end up with all of the colonization? How did we end up with all of the civilized society reaching its tentacles out all across this earth? A bunch of primarily white colonizers. But where did it start? How did we get away from family values? How did we get away from the village? How did we get away from the continuum concept? How did we get away from this kind of foundational happiness that cannot be shook by like a scratch, a fall, a sore muscle? Like they move with humor, with enjoyment, with fun. They love each other. They lift each other up. They're present. They're attuned to their babies. They're connected with each other. And they honor each other's freedom and alignment and needs and differences because they look inward. They all look inward. And there's so much like structure created from that. Okay, so how did we get away from this? Somebody had a family, had a village, had a community, and for whatever reason, they felt that they wanted more. Like, they had this wife, but they wanted that wife too. Or they had this fruit tree, but they really liked that valley over the ways where that other family is living, and they'd prefer to have it. We're having a drought right now, and we're struggling. And so, you know what might solve that? If we head over there and we take what they have, because we don't have what we have. What we need. It could be traumatic and dramatic. It could be a cataclysm. It could be a natural disaster. It could be some kind of destabilization, within the family. And so when you have that destabilization, yeah, you're going to reach out for help. You're going to seek mutual aid. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But I think something so traumatic happened at some point, that there was a man that split. Because it would have had to be back then. In that environment, you could not be a woman. I mean, it would be very hard to be a woman carrying a baby with like naturally less physical strength and like a natural tendency to be more collaborative and communal. It would have had to be a man that said, I'm gonna go over there in this grape and pillage energy, and I'm gonna take what we need. I'm gonna take what we deserve. And that was the beginning of the competition. That was a betrayal to the family. And I don't think that they saw that or felt that in the moment, because it was just a distorted love. It was a distorted commitment. It wasn't right because it didn't align with everybody's values. It was reactive. Remember, the reason this works so well is because everybody's living in the moment. So trauma takes you out of the moment. It makes you hypervigilant. It makes you think about the past. It makes you think about the future. It makes you hyperanalyze everything. It makes you seek solutions and strategize. And sometimes maybe that's necessary. So it's really important that you have some kind of spiritual practice if you're in this sort of environment to prepare you for when traumatic things inevitably happen. 4004 on the timer. Traumatic things eventually inevitably happen. So you have to be constantly training your mind to prepare for those moments so that you respond instead of react. Because this one family, it had to have been I mean, I don't know, maybe some 100th monkey effect, like it was just happening everywhere. Probably not. At least symbolically. One man had a crisis and made a poor choice to gain what he needed by harming others. And in this, we each became a family competing with and looking over our shoulders for the competition of other families. And all this trauma and all this competition tore us apart more and more and more and more and more. And we lost the value inherent in the village, inherent in a family values society. And that is how we were able to entirely move our value and say, actually, progress is value. Saving is value. Hoarding is value. Control is value. The ability to defend ourselves against all these other people that are going to come after us. Because we came after them, and then they came after us, and then we came after them, and then they came after us. You don't have that when the men check in with the women and the children, because the women and the children would say, you're doing the wrong thing. Don't be mean. That isn't going to make us happy. I know you're trying to help us, but that isn't going to help us. And here's why. And let's brainstorm a different idea. And I'm laughing, but oh my goodness. It's not light. It's a heavy topic. It's a real heavy topic. And it has impacted every single one of us, one way or another, no matter where you live. In one extreme, or maybe kind of, in the developing world, but still moving in this direction of removing women and children from the center of society. We have a naturally self-regulating mechanism. Yes. Worship and honor and respect the head of the household. Totally. More power to you. But also honor and respect and revere the mothers and the children and the mother babies who are the source of your spiritual and emotional wealth. Work together. And they will appreciate your practicality. They will appreciate your physicality. They will appreciate your rationality. They won't be you. And they won't put up with you expecting them to be you. Women and children are forgiving and kind and have a wide, a high perspective. They're generally responsive when they're taken care of, when they're safe. We don't need to put a bunch of women into positions of political power in the systems that we have right now, in my opinion, because those institutions are corrupt to the core at their very roots, and remodeling a rotting foundation is downright dangerous and harmful, in my opinion. 44:55 on the timer. We don't need to go on some big campaign to make this happen, though. We don't have to start a revolution, burn it all to the ground. We can quietly, with focus, with intention, without being loud, without judging, without drawing attention to ourselves, without admonishing the people that we disagree with, without demanding or competing, to simply heal ourselves, align with and attract co-creators, and rebuild the family-centered society with the mothers and the children at the center. Not higher than, not better than, not more central than in a competitive sense. You see where the competition came from? All the men and all of the, non-mothers. All of the people in their masculine giving energy, all surrounding these women and children who are just like taking up your resources, eating your food, taking your time. Theoretically, that's instinctually desirable. So you'd think it would work. But at some point, something might have happened to generate this resentment, to generate this comparison, to generate that I want to be in the middle. I want to be in the middle. I want everybody to take care of me. That's not fair. Why do you get that? What? And so the men and the women that were there to protect us became our competition. And that killed the family values centered society. And enabled hundreds of thousands of gotta be careful what I say online. Don't want to get all blocked and banned. This doesn't have to be a war. This doesn't have to be a revolution. This doesn't have to be violence. All we have to do, simple, not easy. All we have to do is do the work internally, heal ourselves, attract and align with co-creators, and quietly rebuild the family value-centered society. 48:48 on the timer. Thank you, yes sir. I had somebody on the live stream the other day who was like from Brazil or something, and she said, I can't understand half of what you're saying. I'm trying my best, but I really just want to stay on the stream because I'm enjoying it and it's resonating with me. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, that really is what we do here. It's about the light language. And that can be communicated through the eyes better than most things, I think. Yeah, thank you, yes sir. So, I'm gonna go get some sleep because clearly a little extra sentimental at the moment. But this is really truly one of the most important topics to me on earth, and I think that it is so lovely and wonderful that we are able to utilize this platform to explore that a little bit more. What does this say on the front of the book of the Continuum concept? It says, if the world could be saved by a book, this just might be the book. John Holt. If you don't know who John Holt is, go Google him right now at this very moment. You'll be glad you did, I think. Okay. I gotta go. I definitely gotta go. Love, light, peace, and personal responsibility. I will see you next time. Boop.